Silver State Correctional Facility towered over the desolate landscape of Laughlin like a gray monolith of concrete and barbed wire. In the heat of a summer day, the hot Nevada air made the asphalt melt, and the gray walls of the prison seemed like a mirage in a shivering haze. To those inside, these walls were either a cage or a workplace, no third. LaToya Vinson walked slowly through the last checkpoint, nodding to a young colleague checking passes. 48 years of life had left its mark on her face, wrinkles around her eyes that even a thick layer of foundation and carefully applied mascara couldn't hide. She adjusted her khaki uniform, which had gotten a little tighter at the waist lately, and headed toward the briefing room. "Late again, Vinson?" Chantel Maxwell didn't even look up from her clipboard as LaToya slipped into the room. "Third time this week." "Sorry, Chantel. Car's acting up," LaToya lied, sinking into a plastic chair. She'd actually spent an extra 20 minutes in front of the mirror deciding which earrings to wear, a little weakness that no one was supposed to know about. Chantel finally looked up. Her short dreadlocks were gathered into a neat bundle, her uniform looked like it had just been ironed, and her gaze was sharp as a blade. "Today's inspection is Block D. The new batch of prisoners arrived yesterday." She handed out the duty rosters. "Vinson, you're in Sector 3, and make sure Kingsley doesn't cause any trouble." LaToya felt her heart skip a beat at the mention of that name, but kept a nonchalant expression on her face. Chantel Maxwell didn't miss a beat. The 43-year-old head of security had a reputation as Silver State's most uncompromising employee. If she suspects anything amiss, "Everything will be fine," LaToya replied confidently, trying to keep her voice casual. The way to Sector 3 was through long corridors with surveillance cameras set up in every corner. LaToya knew the location of each one. In her 15 years at Silver State, she had studied all the blind spots and areas with poor viewing angles. That knowledge was something she'd never needed until recently. Darren Kingsley was sitting in the common room when she entered. His slender figure stood out among the other prisoners. At 27, he held himself with a confidence that made even the older ones give way to him. When their gazes met, he nodded faintly, but the gesture contained more than words could express. Their first meeting had been 3 months ago. Darren had gone to Silver State for the armed robbery of an electronics store, 5 years maximum security. LaToya remembered how he stood out among the other rookies, calm, observant, with penetrating eyes that seemed to see right through people. "Ma'am, can I ask you a question?" he asked when she was briefing the new arrivals. "Yes, prisoner," she replied in an official tone. "Is it true that there are law books in the library? I want to study my case." This question was different from the typical requests for cigarettes or complaints about food. At that moment, she saw him as something more than just another criminal. Now, 3 months later, LaToya paused at the common room table, pretending to check the visitation log. "Kingsley, how's the work in the library going?" she asked loud enough for the others to hear. "It's fine, Officer Vinson," he replied, not looking up from his book. "Finishing cataloging the new editions." "Good. I'll check back after lunch." She noted something in her notebook and moved on. No one could suspect that this brief exchange of phrases was code. After lunch meant meeting in the technical corridor behind the library, one of the few places not viewed by cameras. The day stretched agonizingly slow. LaToya performed her duties mechanically, mentally counting down the minutes until the appointed time. Since her divorce a year ago, her life had become a monotonous existence between prison and an empty house where no one waited. Darren had become the only bright spot, the only one who looked at her as a woman and not a uniformed warden. Around 3 in the afternoon, she finally headed toward the library. Her heart pounded in her chest as she checked the location of the other guards over the walkie-talkie, making sure everyone was in their places. The librarian, an elderly prisoner with a life sentence, nodded to her as she entered. "Kingsley's in the vault, cataloging new arrivals," he said, still sorting through the cards. LaToya walked between the shelves to the far end of the library, where there was a small door leading to the vault. With a quick glance around, she slipped inside. Darren was waiting for her in the semi-darkness of a room littered with boxes of books. His eyes glittered as she locked the door. "I thought you weren't coming," he whispered, coming closer. "Maxwell's been circling like a hawk all day. She suspects something. LaToya allowed herself to relax in his arms. "Darren, this is getting too dangerous." He touched her neck lightly with his lips, making her forget about fear and caution. "You have nothing to worry about. I've thought of everything." His hands slid down her body with a confidence that made her melt. "In 2 months, I'll be placed on light duty. I'll be able to work at the city library in the rehabilitation program." "And what will that change?" she asked, closing her eyes in pleasure. "Everything will change." His voice became serious. "We'll be able to see each other outside these walls, without jeopardizing your job." In those moments, she believed every word he said. Darren could paint the future in such vivid colors that it seemed almost tangible. He talked about how they would meet in a small motel on the edge of town, about how she could help him with his parole, about the life they could build together. "You deserve better than this concrete crypt day after day," he whispered, kissing her. "I can see you withering away in here." Those words resonated with her soul. After 20 years of marriage to a husband who had eventually left her for a woman 15 years younger than her, LaToya felt invisible, unwanted. Darren had given her back her sense of femininity, of desirability. Their encounter lasted no more than 15 minutes, all they could afford without risk of being discovered. As LaToya adjusted her uniform, preparing to return to her duties, Darren pulled a small pill from his pocket. "What's this?" she asked, watching him take it with water from a bottle. "Vitamins," he answered nonchalantly. "The food here isn't very nutritious." She noticed that he didn't look her in the eye as he said those words. "Are you well?" There was concern in her voice. "Of course." The smile returned to his face. "Just caught a cold last week. Nothing serious." LaToya remembered that she hadn't really seen him for a few days last week. "Have you been to the infirmary?" "I went to see Dr. Butts for a checkup." He pulled her to him, stopping her from questioning him further. "Don't worry about me. Just tell me when I'll see you again." They agreed on the next meeting, and LaToya carefully left the vault, checking to make sure no one was around. As she exited the library, she almost collided with Chantel Maxwell. "Vincent," the head of security gave her an appraising look. "You look a little flushed. Is everything okay?" "Yeah, it's just stuffy today." LaToya tried to keep her voice casual. "I was checking on Kingsley's cataloging skills." "How's he doing?" Chantel sounded suspicious. "He's doing great. He's very, diligent." Chantel nodded, but her gaze lingered on LaToya's collar, where one button was fastened wrong. "Be careful with Kingsley," she said finally. "The guy has a reputation for manipulation. His past institution had a history with a female employee who lost her job." LaToya's heart skipped a beat, but she kept a nonchalant expression on her face. "Thanks for the warning, but I know how to deal with prisoners." "I hope so." Chantel glanced at her watch. "Don't forget, we have a meeting at 5. After this meeting, LaToya was more cautious. She and Darren reduced the frequency of their meetings, communicating mostly through notes hidden in the books he gave her, ostensibly for inspection. A week later, LaToya found herself waking up at night in a cold sweat. At first she wrote it off as stress and the constant strain of having to hide their relationship. But then came the headaches and a strange fatigue that didn't go away even after a good night's rest. "You look terrible," her roommate remarked one morning. "Maybe you should see a doctor." "I just didn't get enough sleep." LaToya dismissed it, though inwardly she agreed that something was wrong. That afternoon she spotted Darren coming out of the infirmary. He was quickly tucking some vial into his pocket when he saw her in the hallway. Their gazes met, and for a moment she thought something akin to guilt flashed in his eyes. "Is everything all right?" she asked when they were a safe distance from anyone's ears. "Of course," he smiled, but the smile didn't touch his eyes. "Just a routine checkup. Second visit to the infirmary in a short time. Something wasn't adding up." LaToya decided to talk to the prison doctor, Dr. Jamar Butts. They had never been close, but she knew him as a professional who took the health of both inmates and staff seriously. Jamar Butts was in his office when she knocked on the door on the pretense of getting headache pills. "Come in," he replied, not taking his eyes off the medical records he was studying. LaToya entered, closing the door behind her. The 32-year-old doctor looked up and smiled faintly. "Officer Vinson, what can I do for you?" I have a terrible headache. She sat down in the chair across from his desk. And lately I've been feeling out of sorts. Let's have a look. He pulled out a tonometer. Is her blood pressure normal? While he took her blood pressure, LaToya asked cautiously, I saw Kingsley coming out of here today. Does he get sick a lot? Jamar gave her a strange look. You know I can't discuss the health of patients, he replied in a formal tone, but then added more quietly, but I'd advise you to stay away from him. What do you mean? Her heart quickened. Nothing specific. Jamar took off the cuff of the tonometer. Her blood pressure's a little high. You need more rest and less stress. And if you're worried about headaches and weakness, you might want to get tested. LaToya was about to ask him more when there was a knock at the door. Chantel Maxwell entered. Ah, Vincent, there you are, she said with the look of someone who'd been looking for someone for a long time. You're needed in Block B. There's a plumbing problem. As LaToya walked out, she could have sworn she heard Chantel quietly tell Jamar, keep a closer eye on her. The next few days passed in increasing tension. LaToya noticed that Chantel was often around when she interacted with Darren, even on work matters, and her own well-being continued to deteriorate. Now intermittent dizziness had been added to the headaches and night sweats. One day during her rounds, she noticed Darren handing something to another prisoner, a small package, which he quickly hid. When their gazes met, Darren shook his head faintly, silently asking her not to interfere. That evening, she found a note in the book he'd handed her. We need to have a serious talk. Tomorrow, usual time, usual place. LaToya barely slept at night, pondering Darren's strange behavior, Jamar's warning, Chantel's suspiciousness, and her own deteriorating health. Something was definitely wrong, and her intuition told her that all these things were somehow connected. The next day, she felt worse than usual. Her head was splitting, and her body felt like it was filled with lead. But she went to work anyway, deciding that after she talked to Darren, she would take the day off and see a doctor of her own, outside the prison. The morning briefing was a blur. Chantel said something about an upcoming inspection from the department, but LaToya could barely concentrate on her words. At one point, she caught a concerned look from Jamar, who was also present at the meeting. Vincent, are you listening to me? Chantel's sharp voice brought her back to reality. Yes, I'm sorry, go on, she straightened, trying to concentrate. By lunchtime, her condition had deteriorated to the point where her co-workers were taking notice. Maybe you should go home, suggested one of the warders. You're white as chalk. I'm fine, LaToya insisted, though the room was beginning to spin periodically. When it was time for her meeting with Darren, she could barely walk straight. The library was quiet. Today was a day when most of the prisoners were working in the laundry room. She slipped into the vault, where Darren was already waiting for her. God, LaToya! He rushed to her when he saw her stagger back. What's wrong with you? I don't know. She leaned against the shelving unit. I've been feeling awful for days. Darren, I need to know. Were you really sick? What are those pills you've been taking? His face changed, becoming serious and tense. LaToya, we need to talk, he began, but before he could finish, the vault door swung open and Chantel Maxwell appeared on the doorstep. Her eyes widened with shock when she saw them together. That's what I thought, she said icily. Vincent, you're suspended. Surrender your badge and weapon immediately. LaToya felt the room spinning with redoubled force. The last thing she saw before she lost consciousness was Darren's terrified face and Chantel's triumphant gaze. Darkness engulfed her, taking her away from the reality in which her life had just collapsed. The white fluorescent light of the hospital room burned her eyes. LaToya Vinson slowly regained consciousness, feeling a dull throbbing in her temples. At first she couldn't tell where she was. The sterile walls and the smell of antiseptic seemed foreign and unfamiliar. Trying to rise caused another wave of dizziness. Lie still, Dr. Jamar Butts's voice came from somewhere nearby. You are in the medical block of the prison. The events of the last few hours slowly came to mind. The library, Darren, Chantel's appearance, and then the darkness. LaToya groaned, realizing the horror of the situation. How long have I been unconscious? Her voice sounded hoarse and weak. About 3 hours. Jamar checked the readings on the monitor she was connected to. You collapsed due to severe exhaustion and dehydration. I took blood samples for analysis. There was something else in his eyes, some unspoken concern that made Latoya uncomfortable. And Chantel? She asked, remembering the icy stare of the head of security. Waiting outside. He wants to talk to you when you're better, Jamar said, sitting down on the edge of the bed. But first, we need to have a serious talk, Latoya. The use of her name instead of the formal address, Officer Vinson, suggested that the conversation would be personal. Latoya tensed, preparing for the worst. Your tests are back from the lab. Jamar opened a folder of medical records. And I have some bad news. He paused, as if searching for words. Latoya felt her heart start to beat faster. You've tested positive for HIV, Latoya. The words hung in the air like a heavy lead weight. Latoya blinked, trying to comprehend what she was hearing. It seemed that the doctor was talking about someone else, not about her. It's impossible, she finally said. There must be a mistake. I couldn't. We double-checked the results, Jamar continued gently. The symptoms you've been experiencing for the last few weeks, night sweats, headaches, generalized weakness, are all characteristic signs of early-stage HIV infection. Latoya closed her eyes, feeling the room begin to spin again. This time not from physical weakness, but from shock. Her thoughts raced frantically, trying to find an explanation. She didn't do drugs. She didn't get tattoos. She'd only had one partner since her divorce. Darren, she whispered, opening her eyes. Was it because of him? The look on Jamar's face was answer enough, but he nodded nonetheless. I shouldn't have told you this, he lowered his voice. But given the circumstances, yes, Kingsley is HIV positive. He knew of his status before he arrived at Silver State. Jamar pulled another folder out of his desk drawer, a thicker one marked confidential. This is Kingsley's medical records. He opened it, showing Latoya the notes. He was diagnosed 2 years ago, before his incarceration. He's been receiving antiretroviral therapy since he arrived at our facility. Latoya stared at the dates and signatures on the medical records, and each line was like a knife stab. 2 weeks ago, Darren had had a routine checkup where his positive status had been confirmed. Just 1 day after that, they'd met in the library's storage room where he'd sworn his love to her and made plans for the future. Why? Was the only question she could formulate. I don't know. Jamar shook his head. Maybe he didn't want to lose you. Or... He hesitated. Or what? Latoya looked up at him. Or it was deliberate, Jamar finished. It happens. Some HIV-positive people intentionally infect others. It's called bug chasing or gift giving in certain circles. Latoya felt a twinge of nausea. The thought that Darren could deliberately put her in such danger was too monstrous. I have to talk to him. She tried to sit up. Right now. Latoya, you need to rest. Jamar held her back gently. And besides, you're suspended. Chantel has already launched an official investigation into the prison's breach. I don't care. Steel appeared in her voice. I need to hear the truth from him. Jamar stared at her for a few moments, then sighed heavily. I can arrange for you to meet me in the interrogation room, once, for 5 minutes. But first you need to talk to Chantel. The conversation with Chantel Maxwell was exactly as agonizing as Latoya had expected. The head of security sat across from her with an impenetrable expression, methodically writing down every word on the official record. How long has this been going on? Chantel asked without looking at Latoya. 3 months, Latoya replied, feeling the color of shame flood her face. And you realize that you have violated no less than 7 points of the prison regulations? Yes. Do you realize that you could be prosecuted for sexual intercourse with a prisoner? Latoya closed her eyes. Yesterday she was afraid of losing her job. Today, that problem seemed insignificant compared to the diagnosis she had just received. I see. Chantel finally looked up. Latoya, we've been working together for 15 years. I knew you were going through a divorce, but I never thought you'd go through with it. Disappointment was evident in her voice. Kingsley is a dangerous manipulator. You're not the first person he's used. What do you mean? He had a relationship with a nurse at a previous correctional facility. She lost her job and then tried to kill herself when she found out about his diagnosis. Every word hit the mark. Latoya felt her world crumbling with every passing second. "I need to talk to him," she said quietly. "Why? What do you want to hear? Excuses?" Chantel shook her head. "He used you, Latoya, and perhaps deliberately infected you with a deadly disease." "I know he did, but I need to hear it from him." Chantel looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. 5 minutes in the interrogation room, under surveillance." Darren Kingsley seemed smaller and younger in the brightly lit interrogation room. His hands were handcuffed to the table, standard procedure for high-risk prisoners. When Latoya entered, his eyes widened with surprise, then filled with something that could have been either remorse or simply fear of the consequences. "Latoya," he began, but she held up a hand, stopping him. "I'm not here to hear your excuses." Her voice sounded surprisingly calm. "I just want to know one thing. Did you know about your HIV status when we started dating?" Darren lowered his eyes, and that gesture was more eloquent than any words. "Yes," he finally answered. "I knew. And you deliberately put me at risk of infection?" He looked up, his eyes pleading. "Latoya, I was going to tell you, I swear. I was just waiting for the right time." "The right time?" Her voice trembled. "In 3 months? There hasn't been a good time? I was afraid of losing you." He tried to reach for her hand, but the handcuffs wouldn't let him. "I do love you. Everything I said about our future is true." "What future, Darren?" Bitterness overwhelmed every word. What kind of future could there be for 2 HIV-positive people, one in jail and the other losing her job for having an affair with an inmate? "We could have a chance," he insisted. "With modern medicines, we could live a normal life. We could—" "We?" Latoya interrupted him. "There is no we, Darren. You ruined my life. Look!" His voice became desperate. "I admit what I did was wrong, but it can be undone. When I get out—" "You're not coming out," Latoya said coldly. "Knowingly contracting HIV is a felony. You're looking at additional time, maybe life." Darren's face changed, the mask of remorse slipping away, revealing something cold and calculating. "You'll have to prove it," he said quietly. "My word against yours. Who will be believed, the prisoner or the guard who broke a dozen rules by sleeping with him?" Latoya stared at him, not recognizing the man she'd spent the last 3 months with. "This is who you really are," she said. "All this time I've only seen a mask." She stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. "I will testify against you, and I'll make sure you never go free." As she headed for the door, Darren called out to her, "Latoya, you can't prove it was intentional. No one can." She walked out without turning around, feeling the last remnants of her feelings for him crumble to dust. Jamar was waiting for her in the hallway. It was clear from the look in his eyes that he had heard the conversation through the one-way mirror. "Let's get out of here," he said, taking her gently under his arm. "I'll take you home." The drive to Latoya's house passed in silence. Jamar tried several times to start a conversation, but she stared out the window, absorbed in her own thoughts. Only when they parked outside her small house on the outskirts of Laughlin did she finally speak. "What am I supposed to do now, Jamar?" There was so much helplessness in her voice that his heart clenched. "You need to rest now," he said softly. "Tomorrow we'll start treatment. Modern antiretroviral therapy is very effective, Latoya. It's not a death sentence like it used to be." She nodded, but her gaze remained blank. "I'll walk you out." Jamar got out of the car and opened the door for her. Inside, Latoya's house looked neat but impersonal, as if she'd never settled in after the divorce. A few pictures on the walls, minimal furniture, no personal items in plain sight. "Would you like some tea?" Jamar asked, standing awkwardly in the living room. "No, thank you." Latoya sank down onto the couch. "But you can make your own if you want." Jamar took a seat next to her, keeping his distance. "Latoya, I know this isn't a good time, but—" He took a deep breath. "There's something I've wanted to tell you for a long time." She looked at him with slight surprise. "I've always admired you," he continued. "Your strength, your compassion for the prisoners, your sense of justice. When you were divorced, I wanted to approach you, but I didn't dare." Latoya stared at him, slowly realizing where he was going with this. Jamar. Wait, let me finish. He took her hand. I know you're going through hell right now, and I'm not asking you to reciprocate. I just want you to know that you're not alone. I'll be there to help you through this. And your diagnosis doesn't change anything. At another time, his confession might have moved her. But now, with the pain of betrayal running through her entire being, all she could feel was exhaustion. It's very noble of you, she said quietly. But I can't think about it now. I need time. Jamar nodded, releasing her hand, but something like irritation flashed in his eyes. Of course. I understand. He stood up. I'll leave you my number. Call me anytime, day or night. When he left, Latoya sat motionless for a long time, staring into the void. Then she slowly got up and headed for the bathroom. Standing in front of the mirror, she scrutinized her reflection, the drained face, the faded eyes, the gray roots of hair she had so carefully painted over. How could I have been so stupid? That question pulsed through her mind. The next 2 weeks passed like a blur. Latoya hardly left the house, didn't answer calls from friends and coworkers. Chantel visited her several times, bringing documents for her to sign, a resignation letter, a non-disclosure agreement. Latoya signed everything without reading it. Jamar came every day, bringing food and medicine, trying to get her out for a walk. But with each visit, Latoya felt strangely uneasy. Something in his behavior seemed obsessive, excessive. He talked about the future as if they were already a couple, planned treatments for months in advance, even suggested moving in with him so she wouldn't have to be alone. One day, when he once again started talking about their relationship, Latoya couldn't take it anymore. Jamar, stop! There is nothing between us and there will never be. I'm grateful for your help, but... His face changed instantly, becoming hard and angry. Because of Kingsley? Are you still thinking about him? No, it's not about him, it's me. I'm not ready for a relationship. I may never be. Jamar stood up abruptly, knocking over his teacup. You don't understand. His voice sounded oddly calm, a contrast to the fury in his eyes. I'm the only one who really cares about you, the only one who accepts you for who you are. Please go away, Latoya said quietly. I need to be alone. To her surprise, he immediately calmed down as if someone had turned off a switch. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to push. He picked up the overturned cup. I'm just worried about you. You've become so, distant. Promise me you'll call me if you need anything. After he left, Latoya was relieved. She decided she would never let him in the house again. Gratitude for his help shouldn't turn into an eternal debt. That night she dreamed of Darren, not the manipulative liar she'd seen in the interrogation room, but the one she'd fallen in love with. He was holding out his arms to her, trying to say something, but his voice was drowned in a siren-like noise. Waking up in a cold sweat, Latoya couldn't calm down for a long time. Something important was eluding her grasp, some detail she had missed. The next days passed in a strange daze. Latoya stopped answering Jamar's calls, ignored his messages, didn't answer the door when he came. Gradually, he stopped showing up and she felt relieved. Instead, she immersed herself in researching her illness, spending hours on the internet reading about HIV, about treatments, about living with the diagnosis. Somewhere deep inside, there was hope that it was all a mistake, that repeated tests would come back negative. But with each passing day, her physical condition worsened. Headaches became constant, night sweats persisted, and chronic fatigue prevented her from performing even the simplest tasks. She stopped eating, hardly slept at all, and stared at the wall for hours, immersed in gloomy thoughts. One evening, when Latoya didn't answer several calls, a concerned Chantel Maxwell decided to check in person to see if everything was all right. The two had kept in touch in the 2 weeks since the incident at the prison, and Chantel felt responsible for her former colleague. As she pulled up to Latoya's house, she noticed that all the windows were dark, even though it was getting dark. This was unusual. Latoya always turned on the lights when it got dark, afraid to be alone in the dark. Chantel rang the doorbell, but there was no answer. She knocked louder, then started calling Latoya's name. Latoya, it's Chantel, are you home? There was silence. Chantel's anxiety increased. She walked around the house, checking the windows. In the bedroom, the curtains were not fully drawn, and she was able to peek inside. The bed was neatly made, and the room looked untouched. Returning to the front door, Chantel remembered that Latoya had once mentioned a spare key under a flower pot on the porch. Checking the spot, she did indeed discover the key. Deciding that the situation was serious enough to warrant an intrusion, Chantel opened the door and entered the dark house. "Latoya!" she called out, turning on the hallway light. The silence, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock, seemed ominous. Chantel walked into the living room empty. An open notebook lay on the coffee table. Chantel glanced at the page and froze when she saw the handwriting, which looked like a suicide note. The kitchen was empty too. Only the bathroom remained, the door to which was closed. "Latoya, are you in there?" Chantel knocked, then carefully turned the knob. The door was not locked. She slowly opened it and turned on the light. The scene before her eyes made her freeze in place. Latoya was lying in a tub filled with water. Her eyes were closed, her face calm, as if she were asleep. An empty bottle of sleeping pills lay on the floor nearby. "Oh God, no," Chantel whispered, realizing the horror of the situation. Her hand reached for the phone to call an ambulance, even though she realized that no one could help her. Lakeisha Rayford didn't like Mondays, especially ones that started with suicides. The 29-year-old detective parked her tattered Ford outside a modest one-story house on the outskirts of Laughlin and stood for a moment, looking at the police tape fencing the perimeter. Judging by the number of patrol cars, the case had attracted the attention of the brass. "Detective Rayford?" A young officer approached her with a notebook. "The lieutenant is waiting for you inside." Lakeisha nodded, put on latex gloves, and walked inside. Inside, the atmosphere was typical of a crime scene. Forensics officers were collecting evidence, photographing details, measuring distances. A peculiar odor hung in the air, the kind that comes when a body has been in water for a while. Lieutenant Harris, a heavy-set man of pre-retirement age, met her in the living room. "Rayford, good morning. We have a suspected suicide here, but there's a nuance." "What's that?" Lakeisha pulled out a notebook. "Victim is Latoya Vinson, 48, former employee of Silver State Correctional Facility. She was suspended 2 weeks ago for having a non-statutory relationship with an inmate, found in the bathroom with signs of a sleeping pill overdose. Suicide note on the coffee table. Who discovered the body?" "Her former boss, Chantel Maxwell, says she got worried when Vinson wasn't answering her phone." Lakeisha went to the bathroom where forensics was finishing up evidence. The body had already been taken away, but there were still photos and markings. According to them, Latoya was lying in the bathtub, completely submerged in water. "Any preliminary report from the medical examiner's office?" she asked, examining the photos. "Yes." Harris turned a page in his notebook. "Cause of death was drowning, complicated by an overdose of barbiturates. No signs of struggle. Preliminary time of death is between 19 and 21 hours last night." Lakeisha nodded and returned to the living room. On the coffee table in a plastic evidence bag was a notebook, open at the page with the suicide note. "May I see it?" After getting permission, she put on a fresh pair of gloves and carefully examined the note. The handwriting was smooth, with no visible signs of nervousness or haste, which was unusual for someone about to take his own life. "Where's Maxwell?" Lakeisha asked, closing her book. "At the station, giving a statement. She's in shock, but she's willing to help the investigation." "Good." Cell phone rings. "I'll finish up here and go see her." When Harris left, Lakeisha walked slowly around the house once more, paying attention to small details. In the bedroom, on the bedside table, was a picture of Latoya with a man, apparently her ex-husband. In the closet, a prison guard's uniform hung neatly. In the kitchen, clean dishes were in the drying rack, as if the hostess was preparing for guests. In the living room, she went back to her notebook. Flipping through the pages before the suicide note, Lakeisha noticed that they were blank. That seemed odd. Why open a new little book just to write one last message? Back at the station, Chantel Maxwell looked exhausted but collected. Despite the emotional turmoil, she answered clearly and to the point. "Miss Maxwell, please tell us about your last meeting with Latoya," Lakeisha asked, switching on the recorder. "It was 3 days ago. I brought her termination papers and insurance forms. Chantel took a sip of water. LaToya was depressed, but didn't seem suicidal. She talked about wanting justice. Justice for who? The inmate she had a relationship with, Darren Kingsley. She believed he'd deliberately infected her with HIV. Lakeisha looked up from her notebook. HIV? There was no mention of it in the case file. It's a recent diagnosis. LaToya found out about it the day before she was suspended. The prison doctor, Dr. Butts, had tested her when she passed out while on duty, and she thought she'd contracted it from an inmate? Yes, Darren Kingsley concealed his positive status when they started, dating. Lakeisha made a note of it. This motive for suicide looked convincing, but something still bothered her about the story. Who else knew about her diagnosis? Officially just me, Dr. Butts, and Kingsley himself, but word travels fast in prison. You mentioned that LaToya wanted justice. What exactly was her plan? Chantel frowned slightly, as if trying to remember. She'd talked about filing a formal complaint against Kingsley, perhaps even a criminal case for intentional contamination, but for that she needed proof that he knew of his status in advance. And that evidence exists? Should be in his medical records. Dr. Butts showed it to LaToya. After talking to Chantel, Lakeisha went to Silver State Correctional Facility. The massive prison walls surrounded by barbed wire gave an oppressive impression even to an experienced detective. She was met in the administration building by the interim head of security. Chantel Maxwell was on leave for the duration of the investigation. I'd like to speak to Darren Kingsley and Dr. Butts, Lakeisha said, showing her ID. Kingsley is at work at the library right now. I can arrange a meeting in the interrogation room. Dr. Butts should be in the infirmary. Darren Kingsley appeared younger than Lakeisha had imagined. Slender, with a neat short haircut and intelligent eyes, he looked more like a college student than a hardened criminal. Mr. Kingsley, I'm Detective Rayford. I'm investigating the death of LaToya Vinson. His expression didn't change, but Lakeisha saw his shoulders tense. What happened to LaToya? You don't know? Lakeisha watched his reaction carefully. No. The last time I saw her was 2 weeks ago when we were discovered. Miss Vinson was found dead in her home, presumed suicide. Darren closed his eyes, his face contorted in pain. Because of me, he whispered. What do you mean? Because of what He stopped, as if hesitant to continue. Because of what happened between us. Tell me about your relationship with Miss Vinson. Darren was silent for a long moment, then began to speak, slowly at first, then faster, as if in a hurry to get rid of a heavy weight. We met when I first arrived here. I was working in the library, and she came by often. We started talking, first about books, then about everything. She was lonely after her divorce. I felt lonely too. When did your relationship become intimate? About 3 months ago, he lowered his eyes. I know it wasn't right, but we truly cared for each other. Mr. Kingsley, Lakeisha stepped forward. LaToya Vinson was HIV positive. She thought she was infected by you. Darren didn't look surprised. Yeah, we talked about it the last time we met. She was, furious. Had a right to be. Were you aware of your status before you began your relationship with her? Yes, he answered quietly. And you deliberately put her at risk of infection? Darren looked up, sincerity in his eyes. No, I mean, I knew my status, but I was on medication. My virus was in undetectable concentrations. The doctor said I couldn't infect anyone in that state. Lakeisha made a note in her notebook. Which doctor told you that? Dr. Butts. He's been treating me since I arrived here. That was an unexpected turn. If Darren was telling the truth, the question was how could LaToya have gotten it from him? Do you have proof that your viral load was undetectable? The test results should be in my medical records. Dr. Butts showed them to me before everything happened with LaToya. Next on the list was Dr. Jamar Butts. The prison doctor was a little older than Darren, about 32, with a neat beard and an immaculately clean medical coat. Dr. Butts, Lakeisha began after a formal introduction. I'm investigating the circumstances surrounding LaToya Vinson's death. A terrible tragedy. Jamar shook his head. His voice sounded sympathetic, but his eyes remained cold. LaToya was a wonderful person, We're all devastated. Were you close? In a professional sense, yes. We worked together for several years. But after her suspension, did you keep in contact? Jamar tensed up subtly. Yes, I helped her cope with her diagnosis, brought her medication, monitored her condition. Was that part of your duties? As far as I know, she was no longer a prison employee. No, but, He paused. I felt it was my duty to help. Latoya was desperate. When was the last time you saw her? 2 days before what happened. I stopped by to check on her. And how was she? Depressed, sure. But she didn't seem suicidal. Lakeisha pretended to look at her notes. Dr. Butts, Darren Kingsley claims his viral load was undetectable and you told him he couldn't infect anyone in that condition. Is that true? Jamar nodded confidently. Absolutely. All of Kingsley's tests have shown an undetectable viral load for the last year. That's confirmed by lab tests. Then how could Latoya Vincent have gotten infected from him? Jamar frowned slightly. It's hard to say. Perhaps Kingsley wasn't always taking his medication regularly, which could have caused a temporary increase in his viral load. Or the tests were flawed. There are no 100% guarantees in medicine. Can I see the medical records for both of them? Of course. Jamar pulled 2 folders out of the cabinet. Here you are. Lakeisha scrutinized the documents. Darren's test results did indeed show an undetectable viral load, including the test done a week before the discovery of the relationship with Latoya. However, something about the documents seemed wrong. Are these the originals? She asked, flipping through the pages. Copies. The originals are kept in the central archives. Finished in the infirmary, Lakeisha requested access to the surveillance footage for the past 3 months. She wanted to track the interactions between Latoya and Darren, as well as see how Dr. Butts had behaved. As she watched hours of footage in her office that evening, she began to notice a pattern. Latoya and Darren were really trying to be discreet, but the cameras still captured several episodes when they found themselves alone in the library vault. It was more interesting to watch Dr. Butts. On many of the tapes, he appeared near where Latoya and Darren were meeting, as if he were watching them. On the day Latoya lost consciousness, a camera in the corridor of the infirmary recorded a strange scene. Jamar pulled some kind of vial from his pocket, looked at it closely, and then quickly hid it when other staff members appeared in the corridor. Lakeisha made a note to check what drugs might have been in the vial. The next morning, she was awakened by a call from the duty officer at Silver State. Detective Rayford, we have an incident. Inmate Darren Kingsley was found dead in his cell. Lakeisha arrived at the prison 30 minutes later. Darren's body was still in his cell and the ME had just begun his examination. What happened? She asked the shift supervisor. Supposedly a fight with a cellmate. Taylor. He nodded toward the tall prisoner being held under guard at the end of the hallway. Says Kingsley attacked him and he defended himself. Lakeisha stepped closer to the body. Darren lay on the floor of the cell, his face disfigured by numerous blows. But what seemed strange was the positioning of the body, too neat for a man who had fallen in a fight. When did it happen? Between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m. A guard heard the noise and called for backup, but when they arrived, Kingsley was no longer showing signs of life. Cameras? There's no security cameras in the cells, only in the hallways. Lakeisha interviewed Darren's cellmate, Marcus Taylor. A muscular man with tattoos covering his arms and neck, he looked scared. He started it first, Taylor insisted. I was asleep and he came at me with a shiv. Did you find the shiv? Lakeisha turned to the guard. No, we're assuming Taylor got rid of it. I was defending myself, Taylor exclaimed. He was trying to kill me. Why did he attack you? How should I know? Maybe because of what I said about his affair with the security guard. Everyone knew he'd given her HIV. Lakeisha checked the security cameras in the hallway. The footage showed Dr. Butts walking past Darren's cell an hour before the estimated time of the fight and stopping at the door for a few minutes. Then a security guard appears, they talk briefly, and Jamar leaves. That guard, Eric Johnson, was next on the interrogation list. Dr. Butts was checking inmates with flu symptoms, Johnson explained. There are 3 in our cell block with high fevers. Did he go into Kingsley's cell? No, just asked if anyone else was complaining of symptoms. Did you notice anything unusual about Dr. Butts's behavior? Johnson hesitated. Now that you ask, yes, He seemed tense, and he'd never made his rounds this late before. Lakeisha decided to talk to Jamar Butts again. The prison doctor looked tired, but calm. Another tragedy. Jamar shook his head when Lakeisha mentioned Darren's death. A terrible week. Indeed, Dr. Butts, what were you doing in D Block last night? If he was surprised by the question, he didn't show it. Checking on inmates with flu symptoms. We're having a small outbreak. At 2 a.m.? I was working late on some paperwork. Thought I'd check on the patients. Did you talk to Darren Kingsley? No, Jamar answered without blinking an eye. Didn't need to. He wasn't complaining about his health. Lakeisha watched his face carefully, but she couldn't see any sign of lying. Either Jamar was telling the truth, or he was a very good actor. Dr. Butts, may I see Darren Kingsley's medical records again? Of course. He pulled a folder from the cabinet. Here you go. Looking through the documents, Lakeisha noticed something she'd missed the first time around. Some of the pages were numbered, but the numbers weren't sequential. Between pages 12 and 14, the 13th page was missing. There's a page missing, she said. Jamar glanced at the folder. Indeed. Strange. Perhaps it had been accidentally deleted during copying. I can check the originals in the central archives. I'd like to go with you. In the archive, Jamar looked for Darren's original folder for a long time, but couldn't find it. Very strange, he muttered. It should be here. Maybe someone took it? Is there a logbook? Yes, of course. Jamar checked the logbook. The last time the folder was taken, he stopped talking, staring at the entry. Who? Lakeisha insisted. LaToya Vinson, the day before she died. That was an unexpected twist. If LaToya had taken Darren's original medical records, where could she have hidden them, and why? Lakeisha returned to LaToya's house, this time with a warrant for a more thorough search. She looked for any documents LaToya might have taken from the prison archives, as well as other evidence that might shed light on what had happened. In the bedroom, under the doormat beside the bed, she found an envelope. Inside were photocopies of medical documents, Darren's original test results showing an elevated viral load, which contradicted the copies Jamar had provided. Even more interesting was a flash drive found in the same stash. On it, Lakeisha found several audio recordings, conversations between LaToya and Jamar that she had secretly recorded on her phone. In one of the recordings, Jamar confessed his feelings for LaToya and spoke angrily about Darren. He doesn't deserve you, Jamar said. He used you to get to me. In another recording, LaToya asked Jamar directly, Did you change his test results? Did you know he could infect me? To which Jamar responded evasively, You're thinking too much about it. What matters now is your health, not who is to blame. With this evidence, Lakeisha obtained a search warrant for Jamar Butts' home. In his home office, she found several vials of unlabeled drugs, as well as copies of medical records for several inmates, including Darren, which was a violation of prison rules. But the most important find was Jamar's personal diary, hidden in a hiding place behind a bookshelf. In it, the doctor detailed his obsession with LaToya, his jealousy of Darren, and his plan for revenge. Today I finally did it, read the entry, dated the day LaToya passed out. A small dose in her coffee, and I had an excuse to test her. Now she'll know the truth about her lover. Too bad I'll have to fake the results. But otherwise, she'll never realize the mistake she made in choosing him over me. The last entry was dated the day LaToya died. She found the original results, started asking questions, threatened to expose me. I had no choice. Kingsley's next. You can't leave witnesses. With this evidence, Lakeisha organized the arrest of Jamar Butts. The prison doctor was apprehended during his morning rounds, much to the surprise of his colleagues. In the interrogation room, Jamar initially denied all charges, but when Lakeisha produced excerpts from his diary and audio recordings of LaToya, his composure began to crack. You don't understand, he said, his voice shaking. I loved her, really loved her. And she chose this criminal, a man who manipulated her, used her. Is that why you faked Darren's test results? So LaToya would think he deliberately infected her with HIV? I wanted to open her eyes, Jamar exclaimed, to show her who he really was. And when she began to suspect you, you decided to kill her? Jamar lowered his eyes. It was an accident. I came to talk, to explain. She was in the bathroom. We'd had a fight. She said she was going to tell everyone what I'd done, that I'd lose my license, go to jail. So you drowned her, and then you faked her suicide. I panicked, Jamar whispered. I never meant to hurt her. And Darren Kingsley? Was his death an accident too? Jamar looked up. There was no more pretense in his eyes. No, I paid Taylor to get rid of him. Kingsley knew too much. He was beginning to suspect that his test results had been tampered with. How did you infect LaToya? I didn't infect her, Jamar shook his head. She never had HIV. I faked her results, just like I faked Darren's. She believed it because she did have symptoms, but they were caused by the drugs I put in her food and drink. Lakeisha looked at the man in front of her and saw not a madman, but a calculating manipulator who used his medical knowledge and the trust of his patients to fulfill his own plans. You deliberately drove LaToya to despair by making her believe she was terminally ill, Lakeisha said, and then killed her when she began to suspect the truth. I wanted her to come to me for help. Jamar's eyes filled with tears, to realize that I was the only one who could take care of her, that I was the only one who truly loved her. That's not love, Dr. Butts. It's obsession. Jamar lowered his head. Did you see her with him? He asked quietly. The way she looked at him? I waited for years. I was there when her husband left, supporting her, and she chose a prisoner who only used her for fun. You had no right to decide for her, Lakeisha said firmly, and you had no right to take her life. An hour into the interrogation, Jamar Butts was formally charged with double murder, falsifying medical records and professional negligence. A thorough background check on him revealed several other instances in which he manipulated patients' diagnoses to achieve his goals. In Lakeisha's final report, Rayford wrote, "The tragedy of LaToya Vincent and Darren Kingsley is the result not only of Jamar Butts's personal obsession, but also of a systemic problem of inadequate oversight of the actions of medical staff in correctional facilities. I recommend a review of medical record review protocols and tighter access to medication." A few weeks later, Lakeisha stood at LaToya's grave, where she had come to lay flowers. Next to her was Chantel Maxwell. I should have noticed, Chantel said. All these years, Jamar was there for me, and I never saw him as a threat. The most dangerous predators are the ones that are good at camouflage, Lakeisha replied. You couldn't have known. They were silent for a moment, looking at the simple tombstone. At least her name is cleared now, Chantel finally said. People know she didn't commit suicide, and that Darren wasn't the monster they tried to make him out to be. Lakeisha nodded. Justice had been done, but at what cost? 2 lives had been irrevocably lost due to the toxic obsession of a man who had taken an oath to do no harm. In his mind, Lakeisha thought he was saving,